The librarian looked at me like she had seen a ghost. Then she pushed an old brown book across the desk and whispered, "You need to read this." I stared at the checkout card. My name was written there, dated 30 years earlier. The problem was, I had never seen that book in my life. I opened the cover, and a yellowed envelope fell into my hands. On it were 4 words that made my stomach drop, "For Daniel." When ready. I'm changing names, but everything else happened the way I remember it. And before I tell you what was inside, if you enjoy stories about family secrets and unexpected betrayals, subscribe to Family Betrayal. Also, the faces, photos, backgrounds, and visual scenes in this video are used only to help imagine the story. My hands were shaking when I opened the letter. The first line said, "Daniel, if you're reading this, your father never told you the truth." I almost laughed because my father had been dead for 11 years. Then I read the next sentence. It mentioned the little blue house where I grew up, the scar on my left knee, and even the nickname my mother used when I was 5. Whoever wrote this knew details nobody outside my family should have known. I looked at the librarian. "Who gave you this?" She said, "It was returned to the library 30 years ago with instructions that it could only be given to you when you came looking for a particular book." I asked what book. She pointed to the title. It was the same one my father had always kept locked in his study. I took the book home and barely slept. Every page contained something about my childhood, but the worst part was that some details contradicted everything my parents had told me. The letter claimed my father had a brother named Thomas who disappeared from our family before I was born. I had never heard that name. Then came the sentence that changed everything: "Your father did not abandon Thomas. He helped make him disappear from your life." I spent the next morning searching old boxes in my mother's attic. Behind a stack of Christmas decorations, I found a photograph of 2 young men standing beside the blue house. One was my father. The other had the same eyes I had. On the back, someone had written, "Daniel will understand someday." I felt sick. If Thomas was real, why had my entire family erased him? Then I found something even worse, a second envelope taped beneath the photograph. Inside was a hospital record, a handwritten address, and a date from 30 years ago. The record belonged to a newborn boy. The mother's name was my mother. The father's name was Thomas. I couldn't breathe. According to the document, I wasn't my father's biological son. I was Thomas's son. Suddenly, every strange silence in my childhood made sense. But there was one question I couldn't answer. Why had Thomas disappeared, and why had my father raised me as his own? I drove to the address from the letter, expecting an abandoned building. Instead, an elderly man opened the door. He stared at me for several seconds before whispering, "You have your mother's eyes." I asked, "Are you Thomas?" His face changed. He nodded. Then he said something I will never forget, "Your father didn't steal you from me. He saved you from me." Thomas told me the truth slowly. He had been struggling with his life when I was born and believed he couldn't give me a safe home. My father had stepped in, raised me, and promised never to tell me unless Thomas was ready. But Thomas had written the letter years earlier after learning he was seriously ill, and he had left it with the librarian because he was afraid my father would destroy it. He wasn't trying to take my family away. He wanted me to know that I had never been unwanted. I spent hours sitting beside him, angry at everyone and grateful to everyone at the same time. Before I left, he handed me another photograph of my father holding me as a baby. On the back my father had written, "My son, no matter whose blood runs through his veins." That broke something open inside me. Thomas passed away several months later. I went to his funeral, and for the first time, I stood beside a family I never knew existed. I also finally understood why my father had kept the secret. He wasn't perfect, but he had made a painful choice because he believed love mattered more than blood. I still wish he had trusted me enough to tell me the truth. But I no longer see my childhood as a lie. I see it as a complicated act of love, sacrifice, and fear. The book eventually went back to the library, but I kept the letters and photographs. Sometimes I wonder what I would have done if I had discovered the truth earlier. What would you have done in my place? Would you have forgiven my father, or would the secret have changed everything? Tell me in the comments. Share this story with someone who believes family is defined by more than blood, and subscribe to Family Betrayal for more stories like this. I learned something I wish I'd known sooner. Sometimes the truth hurts because it arrives late, but knowing it can still give you peace.